Mahoney, and I am a pediatrician. I'm also a mindful coach for parents and physicians. And I work with people who I say are successful on the surface, yet struggle underneath, which I think is actually all of us in many ways. And I am also trained as a yoga and mindfulness instructor. And I like to bring mindfulness and yoga teachings into my coaching and parenting and my doctoring, because it's really changed my whole experience of that work. I'm also, for all of you to know, a mom of three. My kids are older now, though I have a 14-year-old as my youngest, and then a 20 and a 23-year-old, which brings different challenges. So I bring that perspective into this discussion as well. And I just wanted to give you a little bit about the Mindful Healthcare Collective for those of you that want to know a bit about that. It's essentially just a group of physicians who also have mindfulness and yoga background training, and wanted to share these tools with our fellow physicians as a way to heal the healers in effect and help us all get through the challenges, not just right now, but the challenges of life as a physician and as parents. So hopefully you will join some of our other sessions as well. There is another one on Thursday on tapping by Jill Wiener, which is fantastic. I did one of them and learned so much. It's not something I was familiar with, so I encourage you guys to try that. The other thing is we do these sessions is they're not medical advice, so just keep that in mind. We're just sharing these tools as a way for all of us to improve our lives and decrease our stress. For today, I wanted to talk about mindful parenting. And I feel like things have actually changed a bit since we did this a couple weeks ago, in that there was this initial urgency. And now it feels like we're very much in this for the long haul. We've been doing homeschooling or crisis COVID schooling at home for a couple weeks. And for most of us, it will be the entire year. And that has brought up, from what I understand, tons of challenges for lots of people. We also, are getting tired of being at home all the time and or coming home from stressful jobs and having others home all the time. And there are a lot of stresses that have come up around that. And our fatigue levels have gone up and our patience levels have gone down. And I've coached a number of parents on issues around this. And I thought it would be helpful to just share some of the learnings that I have from that and share some tips that I have just through mindfulness around parenting in a mindful way and how it can change your experience. I actually had coached a physician a week ago, and she reported back yesterday that she made just a tiny difference, and it made a huge difference in terms of a tantruming toddler. And so I would encourage you all just to try to make a tiny difference in how you show up and how you approach your parenting with mindfulness. I see this moment in time as a real opportunity to change our parenting. So we're all out of our routines. Our kids are out of our routines. And so it's an opportunity for us to just show up differently. Our minds are open and receptive to new ways of doing things because they have to be. And so looking at what can we change today, even if it's a tiny small thing, because when we get back to our normal and kids are rushing to school and we're rushing to activities, we can approach things with a completely new way of doing things. It's also a critical time in terms of imprinting. Whenever we go through a challenging, momentous time, it can have both positive memories imprinted that last for a long time and also negative. And I think many of us remember times in life, whether it's 9/11 or, I can't remember the name of the spaceship that blew up, but I still remember the day and I still remember how I felt. And I think for our children, this is going to be one of those times and moments. And how we respond and how we show up makes a really big difference. I've mentioned before this idea comes from the Maya Angelou quote about they won't remember what we did or what we said, but we remember how we felt. And so I think showing up in a way for our kids around creating safety and love and compassion is really super important right now. To the same degree, we have tremendous imprinting when something goes wrong and there's something scary. And we know from the adverse childhood effects research that those experiences last with us a lifetime. So if there's ever any incentive to change things, I think there certainly is now, given that this is one of those moments. So what I would love to do is along the way, have you guys put into the chat box issues, comments that you are having struggles. And if any of you are interested in getting coached live, let me know and we can unmute you and answer questions and talk about that and do a little bit of coaching. I think we did some last time, and one of the participants had this just incredible aha moment about her concerns with her teens. And I think listening to other people gets coached not only helps you, but helps everyone else. So if people are interested and willing to do that, I would love to do a little bit of that. So feel free to add in your comments, questions, things you're struggling with. And I will just give a little bit more background and thoughts as you're doing that, and then we'll get started in answering your questions and struggles. So I was thinking about what to share today in this moment, and I thought about parenting actually as kind of like yoga. And to me, it just takes the stress and angst and the whole importance of the role out of it and can allow you to really step back and be more mindful and enjoy it. So the first thing that we usually do in yoga is to be present and to pause. And one of the things I learned as a children's yoga teacher is that one of the most important things we can do for kids is actually practice mindfulness ourselves. They experience a more mindful parent, and they see the modeling of being mindful, and approaching it from that standpoint changes their whole experience and changes their understanding of what it is and how they might want to incorporate it and show up for their lives. So I think that that is a critical thing, and we'll practice a little bit of mindfulness in a couple minutes. It's also an opportunity to activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So most people on this call are physicians, and we have our sympathetic nervous systems, fight or flight, just revved up like crazy right now. And so when we pause and are present and are mindful, we can rev up that parasympathetic nervous system and help to calm things down and show up as parents in that way. And when I've done some coaching and you ask parents, well, how do you want to feel when your child is having a tantrum? And a lot of parents can't connect with the feeling. Do I want to feel calm? Do I want to feel this? And I had one physician say, well, I'd like to, feel like the parasympathetic. And I thought for physicians, it's kind of nice because there's not much attached to it, but it's like, how do I generate all of the things that connect with that? So the next tip that I have would be to work on your breathing. And I've noticed many physicians don't breathe deeply. We don't breathe deeply during days, and in the rest of our lives, we also don't take that moment to take a deep breath. And the breath has just incredible power to heal us and to heal others. And so I advocate that you try to breathe deeply whenever you think about it, and model for your children how to do that. And in yoga, we work on breathing in nourishment and breathing out things that no longer serve you, or letting things go. And you can do that just in a moment, whether you have a tantruming toddler, whether you're in an exam room with a difficult patient, just taking that pause, taking in a big, deep breath through your nose, and then letting it all go. And pay attention to your breathing and notice during the day how you likely don't take in deep breaths, and really work on that. So what I wanted to do just for a moment is actually take a moment to breathe together and just notice how the breath can change how you feel. And how we'll start is just place your feet on the floor if you can. Notice the ground underneath your feet. Notice the sensations that you feel on the bottoms of your feet. Ground your hips into whatever you're sitting on. You can sit however you like. Try to lengthen your spine and reach the crown of your head towards the sky, and drop your shoulders. Simple. And then take in a big deep breath through your nose. Out through your nose. And then a big deep breath through your mouth. Let it out through your mouth this time. Another big deep breath in. Another deep breath out. And then you can bring your hand to your heart, your left hand to your heart, your right hand to your belly. Eyes closed if you can. And just start to breathe in and out through your nose in a gentle, even pattern. Try to find balance between the inhales and the exhales. Take a moment to connect with what's going on underneath your left hand. Notice your heartbeat. Notice your chest rise and fall. And then just bring your hands to heart center, press your thumbs into your chest. Take a moment to connect with your intention. What's your intention as a parent today and this week? How would you like to feel as you show up for your kids and for your family and for yourself? Then you can just slowly open your eyes, bring your hands back down towards your thighs. And just pay attention to how you feel at this point. Notice the difference. And that was really just about 30 seconds. So it's something you can do, and even the 1 or 2 deep breaths are amazing and can really be transformative. I like to think also as I'm breathing out, specifically, what do you want to breathe out? So judgment, resentment, frustration, expectations. We carry around a lot of expectations around toddlers and whether they should or shouldn't have tantrums, and our teenagers and how maybe they should behave or not behave. And so I would encourage you, as you take those breaths, to let go of some of those things deliberately and intentionally. So a couple of other thoughts, and then I'll get to answering the questions that are coming in, and maybe have a couple of you join in so we can talk. But other suggestions are to try to create space and compassion. One of the things we've talked about is responding rather than reacting, and that's finding the pause. And so if you can find a pause in between the stimulus, which may be the temper tantrum, it may be something your husband said, it may be something your child said, it may be just seeing them on a screen and that triggering thoughts about too much screen time, and pausing before you respond. And then accepting and allowing what's happening. So some thoughts that are really helpful in terms of creating space and more of a pause are the thought, this is what we have today. That's something for a lot of parents, that when there's all kinds of things happening, or when you're being annoyed, someone has sent in a message just about being annoyed and having this frustration, is like, well, this is what we have today. And when you think that thought, your feelings are just much more calm. And so you show up for that frustration in a totally different way. And that's the experience that this client that I was talking to yesterday really shared, that her toddler was having a temper tantrum. And she went into the room thinking, oh, well, this is what we have today, instead of, I wish you would stop. How can I make it stop? What can I do? How can I fix it? And it just relieves the pressure and creates space and creates compassion also for both of you, for the person tantruming and the person who's experiencing the tantrum. Another thing for teens and older kids is just this idea that everything you're feeling is allowed. And that thought is really, really helpful for both the child and the teen and for the parent. Everything they're feeling is allowed, and everything we're feeling is allowed. One of the tenets in coaching and in mindfulness is just not judging and accepting. And so we have to accept what they're feeling and accept what we're feeling. When we resist reality, we lose 100% of the time. That's another thought. So I find that really, really helpful when we're in these crazy moments. And then another thought is just to get to know yourself and to get to know them better. Be open and try to be receptive. Be curious rather than furious. So how are they just like you in that they're frustrated, they're cooped up, this isn't what they thought, this isn't what they were expecting, particularly for teens. And then being curious about how maybe they're not like you, and it's possible that the way they're responding is very helpful for them. So we talked a couple sessions ago about a teen who was not wanting to do a lot of socializing over Zoom and with friends, and the parent was worried about what that would mean for her future friendships. And the thought is, it's possible this is how she needs to respond, and this is what's perfect for her. And when you allow that receptivity and just openness to getting to know yourself and getting to know them, things really change. And then the last 2 points I wanted to make were this idea of do no harm. And ahimsa is the word we use in yoga and in mindfulness, which means do no harm. And it's do no harm to them. And a lot of us are very clear on that and very clear on doing no harm to patients and trying to show up in a way that's helpful, but also do no harm to yourself. And so show up in a way where there's just compassion for all. That creates this space that allows for things to sort of work through in a different way. And we can talk about some of that with some of the questions that people are messaging. And then the final tool, which I think is really, really helpful and is always a part of mindfulness and a part of life and parenting, is to be intentional. We're often intentional about the outcomes that we want, but to be intentional about how you want to feel. Choose to foster positive feelings in your house and in your family. Remember that what they will remember is how you made them feel, not necessarily what you did. And then thinking about how you want to feel as a parent. And that was what I got at during the breathing and meditation. How do you want to show up as a parent? How do you want to show up for your kids? How do you want to feel during the day? When you look back on this strange pandemic time, how will you wish you had shown up? And trying to be intentional about that. I think that really helps with the calm, more mindful moments. And so I encourage you to just think about that as well. So I'm going to answer some of the questions, and maybe I would be interested if people would like to come on and talk about it. So we have a couple of questions about scheduling and doing virtual calls and keeping routines and household chores and cooking with little kids. And as I read that, what comes to mind is potentially the impossibility of doing all of those things if we have super high expectations. And so what comes to mind initially is this thought, this is what we have today. So what we have today is doing virtual patient calls, toddlers, 3 toddlers, and household chores and cooking and dinner. And so letting go of the expectations that that's all going to work out perfectly, and really taking on this idea of accepting and allowing. So not fighting reality, and then figuring out what you can do and what will work, and being curious and sort of opening up to different tools and situations. And so I know it sounds like it's not a solution, but when we do step back and really say, like, this is what we have today, the way we show up for all the chaos and the conflict is really different. And a lot of physicians are feeling conflicted these days, conflicted between their work and their family, safety at work and safety of their family, and conflicted in, you know, all of this. How do I do this? How do I be a good parent? How do I be a good doctor at the same time? And so figuring out, there's certainly, you know, if you have no help with toddlers and you're trying to do virtual calls, that's going to be really challenging. So what creative things can you do, and creative ways to keep them entertained? And then I think really just accepting and allowing the situation as it is. And if your toddlers walk through your virtual phone calls, that's just how it is. And if they're having a temper tantrum, you know, these are unusual and unprecedented times. So giving up those thoughts of perfection and giving up the judgment. And I do love the idea of Same person asking about the weekly themes and teaching them something. And to me, it's, you know, we do our best. So whatever you do is good. And it's a great idea to have these ideas of weekly themes and, you know, but they're also learning by living through a pandemic. They're learning by watching you work. They're learning by how you show up in this moment. One of the most important things we can teach our kids, especially older kids, is how do we handle adversity? How do we handle chaos? How do we handle these struggles? And so I encourage you to just be open about it and talk about how you're balancing things. And even small kids hear and listen, and they sense your stress and they sense your struggle. So you're going to learn from that. Can they help you with the cooking and the cleaning? And there's tons to be learned in science from that, although at young ages it's a little bit more difficult, but maybe they can help with some weeding or, you know, gardening in a different way. And so I would just say realistic expectations and realize that these are unusual times and do what you can. The next question has to do with tantrums and patience and empathy. So similar strategy is where I would go with this. And the idea is, and this is a child, it looks like, that loses things a lot and a lot of frustration. And I've done a lot of work with parents around this. And so realizing that this is what we have today, I think is super helpful. And because when we're frustrated and resisting the fact that she's yet lost something again and is having a temper tantrum and all of that just makes things worse. Trying to fix it sometimes also makes things worse. So this acceptance does not mean that you like it. It just means that you are accepting it, and you're accepting it for your own peace of mind and because you want to be able to show up in a better space. So when you allow yourself to do that, it just changes how you show up. And again, this client that was mentioning yesterday, same thing. Her daughter's been having recurrent temper tantrums, and she noticed that when she showed up differently for the tantrum, her daughter just sort of looked at her and was like, what's going on? And then they were able to move on to something else. And so I think this idea of when we show up less annoyed and we show up less in the mode, and again, this is our doctor mode, right? We've got to fix everything. We've got to teach them how to not have a tantrum, teach them how to not lose things. And so sometimes when you just step back, it really lowers the stress threshold. And sometimes this person also mentions trying to teach the child mindfulness in the moment. And sometimes you just take the deep breaths right in front of them. You don't have to tell them to do it or ask them to do it, but just take the deep breaths in front of them and show up as not panicked yourself. And then the last bit is when we talk about it ruining our mood for the day, and that is such a common thing, right? And realizing though that they've moved on from the tantrum and yet we're spending the rest of the day feeling frustrated. And so again, what you can control is yourself. We like to think we can control lots of things as physicians, excuse me, and we try to control lots of things as physicians. But in the end, really what we can control is ourselves. And so I love this idea of realizing all I can control is me. And when you change yourself and you control how you respond and how you experience it, it changes everything. So this idea of you're letting go of the tantrum and you're letting go of your frustration and your resentment for you, not for them, not because you've necessarily, and this applies to spouses too, right? Not because you've necessarily forgiven them or you don't think they should have done it, but really to benefit you and to give you a more comfortable life and a more comfortable day. So I think that would be my suggestion for that. And actually, if you are willing and want to unmute yourself, we can talk a little bit more. I know there's also the question just about how to implement this is what we have today and useful things to tell yourself. So if you're willing and want to unmute yourself, we can talk a little bit about that. You can turn your video on too if you want. So I'll give you a moment to see if you want to do that and just talk if that works. And then, and otherwise I can get back to that. The other question that's coming in is someone feeling like they're doing their best at work and being positive and cheerful and handling what comes their way. But then they get triggered when they get home about all the things that haven't happened. And sort of finding that balance. And finding balance is something that is a challenge. I'll just start with that. But also realizing that it's available to you if you want it to be. And so for me, acknowledging, so it's that being aware and noticing of the trigger. And it's like, wow, this is one of my triggers. And for me, my kids have actually been some of the best teachers because they see you and they see you respond to something that's rather small, and you're responding to something that's rather small because of everything that's already happened during the day. And you're just overwhelmed by that, and it's all within you. And this is sort of the thing that tips you over the edge at the end of the day. So a lot of parents find it really helpful in the transition from the day to home to do some mindfulness on the way in. So in the car, you can use Headspace, Calm. If you don't like apps, they have like a 3-minute meditation or a 5-minute meditation, and that can actually completely change how you show up for your family in the evening. It's like a hit the reset button. There's that Annie Lamott quote that says that if you unplug it, everything works again. And so it's kind of like unplugging yourself for a moment in the car, taking a break and trying to feel much more comfortable around that. So I definitely recommend doing that in the transition. In the moment, if you notice it, start to just take a big deep breath. Even one deep breath can reset everything, and it's great modeling for your kids. And then the work is actually in the noticing and being aware and being present. And so if you spend a week just noticing, wow, this triggers me and that triggers me and this triggers me and that triggers me, you start to notice what's happening and you notice the feelings that are coming up. And when you notice them, that's how you can change them. If you don't notice and it just sort of, you just react immediately, then all of a sudden it's out of control. And so what you actually want is to feel and control yourself. And the way to do that is to really connect with your, what's happening inside. And so you're noticing what triggered you, and you're noticing how it feels inside and what's coming up, and just taking in that deep breath and connecting with it. And connecting, sometimes if you allow the irritation too, this is really irritating me, and I'm going to feel that irritation and just sort of let it be, then it dissipates. So with anxiety, that works really, really well. You just dig into the anxiety and you say, okay, well, I'm anxious. Just as it's the same as like, this is what we have today for them, this is what you have today for you. So you had a long, busy day, you're tired. You just sort of accept that irritation and overwhelm, and then it dissipates. So that's one thing that I think that's super helpful. But the meditation and the transition can make a big difference. And the other thought I have on this is like, how do I not let triggers, petty triggers, get to me? And from the coaching mindset work, it's like, well, we think that everything is happening to us. And yet what we want to think is sort of, how is it happening for us? So, and how can we be in control of the situation? And how you're in control of the situation is thinking about how you want to respond, how you want to feel when these little triggers show up, and being intentional around that. So if you think about, there was someone yesterday who did yoga with us through the Mindful Healthcare Collective, and she said her kids were jumping in and interrupting, and she had this vision of how she was going to get an hour of yoga. And then at the end, we closed with this thought about how do you want to show up today, and what's your intention for yourself today, and how would you like to feel? And she thought, oh, well, I would like to feel calm and, accepting, and that sort of changed her whole mindset shift about the frustration about yoga. And so how would you like to feel when you get home? And really focus on that, and focus around thoughts around that. So rather than, buttons being pushed or why it's irritating, I think I sound like a broken record today, but sometimes for me, that thought, this is what we have today, it's kind of neutral and it's easy to remember. And so if you have a few thoughts in there that just kind of repeat themselves, then you don't have to be thinking of a specific thought. When you work on it more specifically, and if you want to unmute yourself, I'm happy to have you talk a little bit about like the very specific example and what you were thinking and how it made you feel. And then we work on an alternate thought to help you come back to it. The last one I can think of is also this idea of how is she just like me? Or just like me, you know, when they're pushing buttons, she's feeling overwhelmed. She's living through a pandemic. And so I do think that that sometimes can be a very helpful way to think about it as well. So another thought there, if that's helpful. Does anyone else have any questions, or anyone want to unmute themselves and we can talk a little bit more about specific situations? I do find when we work on the very specific situation, you can really see how these tools apply. So if anyone is willing or interested to do that, you can unmute yourself. I'll give you a minute to do that.
Yeah, I submitted the question about my daughter having the tantrums.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this is something that has been going on for years, and it's like this recurrent tantrum of like losing things, and then she tries to find it and she gets more and more panicky, and then it becomes very emotional. And you know, she's at the age where she can, you know, she understands that it's not like lost forever. And my husband and I have already tried many strategies to try to mitigate these.
Tell me how old she was. 4?
She's 7.
7.
So the thing is that I think the hard part is because it's happened so many times, like both of us, our patience and our empathy for her ends up becoming a little bit, like it's basically tapped out. You know, like, I think when she was younger, like we're like, okay, this is normal. She's like a certain age, it's supposed to happen, whatever. But, you know, over time it becomes more and more grating to us. And I think where we've become less and less empathetic and more annoyed, I think. And it's very hard in this situation. Like, because what happens is that it'll happen like, you know, like right now she's at home all the time. It's happening, I guess, like not as frequently, but it's still occurring like periodically, you know, like a couple times a week, it'll be some silly thing that she lost that she can't find. And then, like, so in the moment, it's very hard for me not to be like, oh, okay, this is happening.
Here we go.
Again. Yeah. Right. Here we go. So it's just
here we go again. Yeah.
And that's the part where I know I need to kind of do like a mental check, but it is such an automatic thing that, and she comes to me like weepy and crying and stuff. So at that moment, it's really hard for me to just like take a deep breath. And so I don't know if I should be like stepping away from it, or I need to do something else to kind of compose myself. And it's definitely gotten better. Like, I think just over time we're handling it better, but it's still something that I find is quite challenging for me to handle. And my husband is extremely patient. And so the fact that he's also less, you know, less empathetic than he used to be also just tells me that, like, you know, it's not just me, it's both of us, but I'm definitely like much more impatient than he is. So I think it's just like, I know these things that you're saying, and I think it's just hard in the moment to implement them with young kids. Like, should you, because you know, when they come to you and they're whatever, crying or screaming or whatever the issue is, like, it is hard for me to be like, just take the breath now and you know.
Well, it's hard for you because you're in the habit, right? That it's that unconscious thought is popping up, like, here we go again. Like, that's what's popping up, right?
Right.
And so maybe acknowledging that, like, oh, of course I think that. This keeps happening, you know, and accepting it and being really, so allowing it from that standpoint and allowing your irritation. So you're noticing it and just saying, yes, of course I'm irritated. She does this every time, right? So that rather than saying like, okay, well, I'm going to be all mindful and peaceful here, because you don't feel it, right? You feel irritated. Right. And so, because you mentioned your thought was, you know, this is happening again. It's been going on a long time. We're out of empathy, right?
Right.
All those thoughts are making you feel something. What do you feel when I say those?
I mean, I know that's the thing. I've known this for a while, so it's been very challenging. Because I'm just sort of like waiting for her to grow out of it, but it's, you know, she's like 7 now, so I'm like,
well, you think she should have grown out of it, right? That's your thought. She should have already
kind of. Actually, I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and I was like, a child psychiatrist, and I was like, when do the tantrums stop? And he's like 10. And I was like, no.
Yeah. Well, and I was talking to a mom the other day who is like, well, but my child's really precocious and really mature, and so she shouldn't be having tantrums. And I was like, well, maybe she's having tantrums because she's precocious and mature and understands so much more, and this is all much more overwhelming for her. So I would say that if you really look at these thoughts, and if you look at them one by one and really connect with how they make you feel. So most doctors, we don't want to look at how we feel. In fact, we've often been told not to feel, right? To be in these moments and not feel. But when you connect with the thought and how it's making you feel, so your thought, like, this is happening again, that makes you feel something. Like maybe defeated, frustrated, I'm not sure what.
Yeah.
What do you think it makes you feel when you think your brain is automatically going to that thought?
Yeah, I mean, I think I feel frustrated. I'm frustrated and annoyed. Yeah, that's what I feel.
Okay, and when you feel frustrated and annoyed, how are you showing up? So what's happening is she's having this tantrum over something lost for the 13th time. I'm making that up, but right?
For the like 200th.
For the 200th, she's having her 200th tantrum about losing something. Okay. And then your thought is, this is happening again. And you feel frustrated and annoyed. So then how do you show up when you feel frustrated and annoyed?
I mean, I don't know. Normally I'm just like, okay, let's go try to find it, and sometimes we don't find it, sometimes we do, but I feel like either way, whether we find it or not, like, I don't want to have that situation keep recurring. Like, sometimes it comes to a point where I'm kind of like, she has too many things that she's losing so many things, and then I think I should just take all those things away. But it's like impossible to take you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Everything from her child.
Well, the issue is that your thoughts about this, right? Now you have another thought. She has too many things. That's the problem. Or she should have outgrown this. That's the problem. This is a really hard situation. And all those thoughts are leading you to these feelings, which are the ones, that's what's showing up for you. It's just this crummy feelings, right? Frustrated, irritated, annoyed. And when you have those feelings, there's something in how you show up, right? Maybe it's a little wooey, but I grew up in Berkeley, right? So it's energetically, if nothing else, you're showing up with this sort of just angsty energy, right? And so my guess is too, your words are short, your tone is a little different. You're probably not the Zen mom who's helping her, right? I'm just going to throw that out there, which is 100% understandable. So no judgment. Again, the first thing is don't judge yourself for that, because at the beginning you were mentioning, right? You're judging yourself about how you're showing up, and you're also judging her about how she's showing up. So pulling all of that out of it can be very helpful. And that's why we switched this thought. Even if your thought, instead of this is happening again, maybe of course this is happening again.
Okay.
I don't know if that would help you. So you're accepting that it's happening. And again, you don't have to like it. You're just accepting that it's happening again. Of course this is happening again, because this is what she does when she loses things. Or, because she hasn't outgrown it yet. So something that just feels different. But if your unconscious thought is this is happening again, what about, of course, this is happening again? How does that feel?
I guess that's okay. Just I don't know that, like you were saying, not to judge her, this, I guess in my mind, that feels a little bit what I would like to do is to before I get the irritation, for me to, I don't know, do something to kind of snap out of it. Cause I think the issue with the reason why this bothers me is not just because of what it's happening, but also that I think that when these situations occur, when she was younger, and I think this is the case for most parents, you're always trying to help them in the tantrum, you hold them if they're crying when they're little, you try to help them figure out what the problem is and to try to solve it or fix it, right? Or just listen to them. But like, again, because this is an issue that's been going on for so long, like the repetitive pattern of it has made it to the point where, like, like I don't want to, at that time, I don't really want to hold her or help her find it. It's just like, I just kind of like, it's happening again. Like, why is this happening again? And I want it to stop, like that's kind of basically what the situation is.
So
So
your thought is, I want it to stop.
well, I just feel like what I would like is, like, if she loses something, to just be like, she looks for a little bit and then she can't find it. She comes to me like, I can't find my blah. And then we just go and try to find it together, which I think is like an ideal situation, I think. But I think what happens for her is she's very independent. And so she tries to find it for herself. And like the more and more she can't find, the more and more panicky she gets. And she is not as good about, even though we've talked to her about it many times, about stopping at a certain point to ask one of us for help. Like, she wants to do it all herself. And that's partially because she's so independent. But it creates this like bad cycle. So by the time she comes to us, she's already like almost in tears about not being able to find the thing that she wants. So
what if this is an important process for her to go through, right? So she is learning how to get through, to figure out what to do when she's lost something. She's learning how to figure out when she's upset, how to manage it, right? Because sometimes you just want to fix it. You want it to stop. You want her to outgrow it, right?
yeah.
But
I guess
often
so.
we can't do that. So I have a son with ADHD who did all these things, and now all of a sudden he, does different things. He's matured, and and I wanted all these things to stop, and I'm like, no, we're going to learn how to do this. And part of it is that it's something that they are working through. And so as parents, it's not a reflection of your parenting. It's not a reflection of her not being a good kid, or it's part of life. And again, when we resist the reality, I think I mentioned that, that's a very helpful thought for me. We lose 100% of the time. Now, it doesn't mean that you don't guide her, right? So you can say, hey, maybe you should try this. But when we're really emotionally attached to it, it comes across differently. And the mindfulness piece is just accepting it, right? And again, it doesn't mean that you're not going to try to guide her, especially if it's something important, or but this is something she's clearly working through. Someday you're going to look back and say, remember those 3 years when she would lose everything and she would have these temper tantrums, and it was and now she's this person who does all these other things and is amazing, right? And so she, as you said, she's really independent, and so that's her superpower, and this may be her thing that she's still working
Okay.
on. My guess is that the judgment around that you think she's should have outgrown it, we often is sort of a judgment of ourselves also, because you think you should have fixed it by now.
Yeah, probably both. Yeah.
Yeah, right? It's a little bit of both.
Yeah. I think too, with kids, like, it's hard as a parent because you see your kids as so big because their personalities. And I think that it's hard to see her as like little, even though I know she's like little.
Yeah. Well, maybe you've told yourself she's just 7. Of course, this is happening again. She's 7. When she loses stuff, she gets upset.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe that, of course, because I don't think you're ready. We call them like stepladder thoughts, where you find something that feels comfortable and you can just be with it. And then you get used to that. And then you kind of move to the next step. And my other thought is that with this other woman whose child was tantruming, as she said, it was like I made the tiniest change in just how I thought about it. And then things just started to shift. So start with a tiny change, and then you can keep, each tiny change adds up.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see. Does anyone else have questions or things that they are struggling with that they want to bring up or try to problem solve? Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to, or you can put something in the chat box.
Hey, Jessie, it's Nicole.
Hi.
one thing that I've noticed, like you're actually helping with a lot of the things that I need to be saying when my son, my 4-year-old, gets kind of funny.
Mhm.
One thought I keep going to is I'm like, why does he do this? Like there's almost like something wrong with him, or
Okay.
he's doing it to hurt me.
Mhm,
He's
mhm.
like a smart little guy, and that's not helping any of us.
Yeah.
One thing I wanted to ask you though is how do you know, like, okay, if I just change my thoughts, of course I will come at a much calmer way, but how do you know if you're just being kind of passive isn't the right word, or like
Permissive.
when you need to, right, yeah,
Yeah.
permissive versus like when you need a parent versus like what you need to let go by, I guess, or
Yeah, it's a good point. I think it's just changing how you show up. It doesn't mean, and I think we talked about this, doesn't mean that you don't have boundaries, right? So you can have boundaries about what's acceptable and what they need to do. But when we are trying to control their behavior, we can't. So you can have consequences where, you are in your room if you do this, but so I think that's the difference. And for me, like the younger toddler kids, it actually, the whole tantrum thing is kind of escalating as we play into it, right? Because we play a part in how we show up for it. So when you sort of step back and are more mindful, then the situation changes. But if they're doing something dangerous, or hurting somebody or hurting themselves, that's where you do create the boundary. And you can so the boundary is the consequence, right? And you can choose to employ that at any point. But I would say, like around tantruming, or we often want our kids to do things because we think it's the right thing to do, but it isn't. It could go either way. And so that's where I would kind of say, you don't want them ruling the roost and jumping off of furniture, things like that, right? But so if you impose the consequence and they have the tantrum, then you just let that be, right? So I think it's being clear on what your boundaries are, but not creating them. So, and I'm actually terrible at this as a parent, but when you're mad, right, you're like, well, you can't do this, I'm gonna take this away, I'm gonna do, right? So you have all that, you have the rules kind of set beforehand. But realizing that in a pandemic, a lot of the rules are off. And so figuring out sort of what the guidelines are, what is acceptable, how can you have sort of the most love, the most compassion, the most learning, the most accepting? Because part of it is some of the people were talking about, like the conflicting needs, and they need to work from home and watch 3 toddlers and make dinner and do all of these things. And it's like, well, that's not necessarily possible to do all that in a beautiful, seamless way. And so accepting where you are, and being clear. I think that kids do often need, rituals, schedules, plans, and so sticking with that.
okay.
And set your guidelines. Well, no, it's lunchtime, and if it's lunchtime, it's lunchtime, and then they can be upset. And so you can sort of have that be the guide. And some kids really need that, and some parents really need that. It's kind of like sleep training, right? Some parents have to have a sleep trained kid and they will do whatever, and others, it's just not that important. And so you have to figure out what works for your family. But when you have something that's really not working, that's where sort of changing how you show up can change it. And then you can decide what you need to do.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I
And
catch
remember,
myself.
yeah, go ahead.
We get like an argument, me and the 4-year-old. I'm like, what am I doing right now?
Right.
What is he doing to me?
Right. So notice, you just notice, oh my gosh, I'm arguing with a 4-year-old. Wow, that's interesting. Right. And be curious, don't judge yourself. It's like, that's a hot mess. Well, I don't know why I'm doing this. So I think it's just a useful way to think about it. And it isn't, I'm not advocating for no rules and no behavior consequences, but when they're out of control in a tantrum, like you've watched your kids, like it's not gonna, like imposing the threats doesn't work usually. So, and the hope is that if we're all more mindful, there'll be less temper tantrums, but we have adult temper tantrums. They just look different. Right?
Yeah. Mine looks similar to the 4-year-olds this morning. Yes.
Sometimes they look the same, but most of the time they look different. And teen temper tantrums look different. That's slamming the door and saying, I hate you. It's the same. It's like what we do when we've lost it. And so To me, it's the, like, once I realize that, I'm like, oh, this is my version of a temper tantrum. We all have temper tantrums. We just learn to modify them and adapt to them differently. I'm not sure we ever outgrow them. We just figure out how to make them more socially acceptable.
That's true. Thank you, Jessie.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Anyone else have anything? We have a couple minutes. And if not, I had a request to move these sessions earlier on Sundays. And if any of you are on would prefer them earlier, you can just add that in the chat box, because I can talk to Ni Chang about shifting them earlier. We're on the West Coast, so 9 always feels good to us, but I realize it's the middle of the day for other people. So we could potentially do 8 or 8:30 if that works better for people. So if anyone has an opinion, let me know. And otherwise, I just wanted to end with a little bit more mindfulness as you head out into your day. And again, just deepen your breathing. Take in a deep breath through your nose and a deep breath out through your nose. Notice your feet on the floor, your hips grounding into your seat. Straighten your spine, drop your shoulders. Allow your heart to be light in your chest. Bring your left hand to your heart and your right hand to your belly for just a moment. Take a moment to have compassion for yourself, for all the things that you do well, for all the parenting victories and your amazing children. And take a moment to connect with, at this moment, everything that's actually right in the world. Bring your hands back to heart center, press your palms together. And again, take a moment to connect with your intention or your wish for the day. How do you want to show up today for yourself, for your family, and for your community? How do you want to feel as you approach the day and as you live this day and these moments together in quarantine with whoever you're with and whatever you're doing? And take in a big deep breath through your nose. Let it all out through your mouth. Slowly open your eyes. Thank you all for joining today. We will do this again probably in 2 weeks, would be my guess. Feel free to message me if you wish, either on Facebook, or you can find me. I have a website, which is jessiemahoneymd.com. If you have questions or you want to find out more about coaching or mindfulness or yoga or anything like that. We are going to do another yoga session similar to yesterday if anyone wants to join next Saturday. So hopefully that was helpful. I'd love to hear any feedback and reach out if you need any other help. Thanks again for joining, and sorry for the technology glitches at the beginning, but I'm glad we got it working. Thanks again. Have a great day.